Linn Washington needs little introduction. Mumia referred to him as Dr. Linn, not only because he's a professor at Temple University in media and journalism, but because of those incisive and penetrating and passionate short columns that he writes. You can find them all over the web online. I invite you to do so. Dr. Linn Washington.
Thank you. And I feel at somewhat of a deficiency speaking after Mumia and then also after Michael Cord. Big footsteps to follow up on. But if I could say one thing that'll begin and end all of the discussion right here is that in America, and Cord, as well as Mumia, who's an excellent lawyer, can tell you, courts are supposed to follow their rules. It's called precedent. When they make a ruling, they're supposed to follow that ruling, and unless something very dramatic changes. Black people were kept in slavery for, as you know, hundreds of years because courts said, this is precedent. We don't like this, but this is what the law is, so we can't change it. Women were denied the right to vote because this is precedent, we can't follow it. At one point in the United States, women were not even allowed to be lawyers. And in the 1860s or 70s, there was a US Supreme Court ruling where a justice said a woman's place is really in the kitchen. We don't need them in law school. So this is precedent. So if the law was followed as it is, the precedent, Mumia would have a new trial. There was a ruling that was issued by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that said, even if the evidence of guilt piles as high as Mount Everest, even if the district attorney consciously believes the defendant to be guilty as Cain, and no matter with what certainty the judge views the culpability of the accused, the defendant is still entitled to all of the safeguards of a fair trial announced in the Constitution, the law. Everybody's entitled to a fair trial, even if you think that they're guilty. This ruling came down from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court January 5th, 1959, when Mumia was 5 years old. If the Pennsylvania Supreme Court had followed its rulings, Mumia would get a new trial. I mean, they have let people off of death row directly on instances of impropriety by prosecutors and police and judges that are less than what is in the Abu Jamal case. But every time Mumia gets to a point where his rights are supposed to be respected and upheld, the courts either turn a blind eye, or worse, they bend the law or change the law. Attorney Cord just talked about Batson, and that's a ruling that says that you cannot discriminate and keep minorities, specifically blacks, off of a jury. This case, in terms of a Batson violation in Mumia's matter, open and shut. Open and shut. The prosecutor kept blacks off the jury. But the courts keep turning a blind eye to it. Sabo, well, we know he's blind because he's biased, or was, he's dead. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, same way. District court judge, well, I think I smell something that it don't smell right, but maybe yes, maybe no. I'll let the appellate court handle it. So when it gets up to the appellate court, they make new law. I mean, they just created some new stuff. So much so that one of the three judges said, this stinks. He writes a 64-page dissent saying that this is absolutely wrong for us to change our laws around. And let me put one more thing in context, and I'll turn it over to Dave. Less than a week before the Third Circuit created this new law to deny Mumia his rights, his legal rights, his constitutional rights, and his common law rights based on court rulings, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling in a case involving a man on death row in Louisiana, and they said that one juror was bounced off because of race. This guy deserves a new trial. That ruling that came 1 week before the Third Circuit here in Philadelphia, right across the street, perverted the law, was written by a conservative justice named Samuel Alito. Samuel Alito used to sit on the Third Circuit Court right over there before he went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And when he sat on that court, he was still conservative, he was still a Reagan Republican, and he voted to grant Batson relief to people here in Philadelphia as well as Pennsylvania. So when you talk about the notion of Mumia being a political prisoner, it doesn't have anything to do with what happened before he was arrested. It has everything to do with what has happened to him subsequent to his arrest and false conviction in 1982.
Thank